There is something you felt this week and you couldn't quite explain it. It wasn't just stress. It wasn't just tiredness. It wasn't even something you could point to and say, "This is the reason." No, this was different. This was deeper. This was the kind of weight that sits on your chest in silence, the kind that follows you from morning to night, the kind that lingers even when everything around you looks normal. And what unsettled you the most was how suddenly it came. One moment, you were fine moving through your days, handling life the way you always do. And then, almost without warning, something shifted. Your energy dropped. Your patience thinned. Your thoughts became heavier. Even the smallest things started to feel overwhelming. Conversations felt draining. Silence felt louder. And your spirit felt like it was carrying something it didn't choose. You tried to shake it off, didn't you? You told yourself maybe you just needed rest. Maybe it was just a bad day. Maybe you were overthinking. But deep down you knew this wasn't ordinary. Because this feeling didn't leave when the day ended. It followed you into your nights. It sat with you in your quiet moments. It whispered questions into your mind that you didn't invite. And here's the truth you've been sensing but haven't fully named yet. This was not just a natural weight. This was spiritual pressure. Yes, you heard that correctly. What you've been feeling all week is not random. It is not meaningless. And it is definitely not something to ignore. Because when pressure builds like this without a clear source, when your spirit feels heavy without a visible reason, when your peace feels interrupted for no obvious cause, it is often because something unseen has shifted around you. You see, there are moments in life when the physical world looks calm, but the spiritual atmosphere is anything but. And this week something moved. Something changed in the unseen realm, and your spirit picked up on it before your mind could understand it. That's why you felt off balance. That's why your emotions felt amplified. That's why even your thoughts didn't feel like your own at times. Because pressure like this doesn't come to everyone. It comes to those who are sensitive, those who are aware, those who are carrying something significant in the spirit. And you are one of them. That's why you couldn't ignore it. That's why it kept returning. That's why even when you tried to distract yourself, something inside you kept saying, "Pay attention, something isn't right." You weren't imagining it. You weren't being dramatic. You weren't overthinking. You were discerning. Because when spiritual pressure begins to build, it doesn't always arrive with noise or chaos. Sometimes it arrives quietly, subtly. It presses on your peace. It weighs on your clarity. It tries to cloud your focus just enough to make you question yourself. And that is exactly what you've been experiencing. But listen carefully now, because this is where everything begins to shift. Pressure is never the beginning of something ending. Pressure is always the sign that something is about to change. Something is forming. Something is moving. Something is preparing to either break through or break down. And your spirit has been standing right in the middle of that tension all week. You may not see it yet. You may not fully understand it yet. But there is a reason this pressure chose you. There is a reason it showed up now. There is a reason it hath been so persistent. And in the next part, the truth behind that reason is going to be revealed in a way you cannot ignore. So stay alert. Stay present. Stay open. Because what you've been feeling is only the beginning. Type "I am aware" in the comments if you felt this shift. Blessing code 717 is now surrounding you. What you have been feeling is not just internal, it is environmental. Something shifted around you this week, and even if you could not see it with your eyes, your spirit recognized it immediately. That is why the pressure felt so unfamiliar, yet so undeniable. Because when the spiritual atmosphere changes, it does not ask for your permission. It simply settles in, and everything within you begins to respond. You may have noticed how certain places suddenly felt heavier than usual. Rooms that once felt calm started to feel tense. Conversations that should have been simple carried an unspoken weight. Even your own thoughts seemed louder, more persistent, harder to quiet. That is not coincidence. That is what happens when the atmosphere around you is no longer neutral. There are moments in life when everything appears the same on the surface, but beneath it, something deeper is moving. And this week, the environment around your spirit became charged. Not chaotic, not explosive, but charged in a way that created resistance. A resistance you could not logically explain, but you could feel in your energy, in your focus, in your peace. You might have found yourself feeling drained without doing much. You might have struggled to concentrate on things that are usually easy for you. You might have felt irritated by things that normally would not bother you. These are not random reactions. These are responses to a shift that your spirit is trying to process in real time. Because when the atmosphere changes, your spirit goes into awareness mode. It begins to scan. It begins to question. It begins to alert you that something is different, even if your mind cannot fully articulate what that difference is. And that is exactly where you have been all week, standing in a space where things feel familiar, yet something underneath it all feels off. This kind of shift often brings a subtle tension, not the kind that explodes into obvious conflict, but the kind that lingers quietly. It shows up in delays. It shows up in miscommunication. It shows up in moments where things always go smoothly, but something interrupts at the last second. You may have experienced plans not working out the way they should, or simple tasks taking more effort than usual. That is how atmospheric resistance operates. It does not stop everything completely. It just makes everything harder. And here is what makes this even more important to understand. This shift did not happen randomly. It aligned with your timing. There is a reason it appeared this week and not last week. There is a reason it intensified now instead of earlier. Because spiritual shifts are often connected to movement. And whenever something is about to move forward in your life, the atmosphere around you can begin to react before you even take the next step. That reaction can feel like pressure. It can feel like confusion. It can feel like being pulled in different directions at once. One part of you wants to move forward, while another part feels held back by something you cannot see. That internal conflict is not weakness. It is the result of standing in an environment that is adjusting to what is happening within you. You are not the same as you were before this week began. Something in you has been rising, even if you have not fully acknowledged it yet. Your awareness has been sharpening. Your sensitivity has been increasing. Your ability to sense what is right and what is off has become stronger. And when that happens, the atmosphere around you does not remain passive. It responds. This is why certain people may have seemed different this week. Their tone, their energy, their presence may have felt slightly altered. Not necessarily negative, but not aligned in the same way it used to be. Because when your internal state begins to shift, it changes how you experience everything around you. The same words can feel heavier. The same situations can feel more intense. The same environment can feel unfamiliar. Not because everything changed externally, but because your perception is no longer the same. And that is where many people get confused. They assume something is wrong with them, when in reality, something is changing around them. You were not losing your balance this week. You were adjusting to a new frequency in your environment. And adjustment always comes with pressure. It always comes with moments of discomfort. It always comes with a period where things do not feel stable. But instability does not mean something is going wrong. It often means something is recalibrating. And right now, your spirit is in the middle of that recalibration, trying to align with what is shifting, trying to make sense of what it feels, trying to stay grounded while everything around it feels slightly off. This is why it was so important for you to notice what you were feeling instead of dismissing it. Because awareness is the first step to understanding what is actually happening. And what is happening is not random. It is connected to you. It is connected to your timing. It is connected to something that is beginning to unfold, whether you see it yet or not. So do not ignore what you have felt this week. Do not brush it off as just another passing phase, because this kind of shift does not come without a reason. And in the next part, that reason is going to become very clear. Type "I can feel the shift" in the comments. Lesson code 909 is now activating clarity around you. There is something you need to understand now, and it may challenge the way you've been interpreting this entire week. This pressure did not find you by accident. It did not just happen. It was not random, and it was not something that simply landed on you because of circumstances. There is a deeper reason why it settled on you, why it stayed with you, and why it refused to leave even when you tried to ignore it. Because pressure like this is not assigned to everyone. It is directed. And you were the one it was directed toward. Now before your mind begins to question that, before you start to wonder why you, listen carefully. This is not about punishment. This is not because you did something wrong. This is not because you are weak. In fact, it is the complete opposite. You were targeted because of what you carry. There is something about your spirit that is different. You have always felt things more deeply than others. You have always noticed shifts before they became obvious. You have always had a sensitivity that others could not quite understand. And sometimes, you even tried to ignore that part of yourself, to blend in, to not feel so much, to not notice so much. But it never truly went away, because it is part of who you are. And that sensitivity, that awareness, that ability to feel what others overlook, it makes you responsive to what is happening beyond the surface. It makes you someone who cannot easily be disconnected from what is real beneath appearances. That is why when the atmosphere shifted, you felt it immediately. That is why when the pressure came, it stayed with you. Because your spirit is not passive. It is active. It is aware. It is tuned in, even when your mind is trying to rationalize everything. And that is exactly why this pressure was drawn to you. You see, not everyone notices when something is changing. Not everyone responds when something is trying to move. Some people can go through the same week you just experienced and feel nothing unusual at all. They continue as if everything is normal, unaware that anything has shifted. But you could not do that, because you are not built to ignore what is real. And when something begins to move in your environment, your spirit does not stay silent. It reacts. It processes. It tries to understand. And sometimes that process feels like pressure, because you are carrying awareness that others are not carrying. This is where the misunderstanding often happens. You think something is wrong with you because you feel more than others. But the truth is, you are feeling what others are missing. And that comes with responsibility. It comes with intensity. It comes with moments where you feel like you are carrying more than you should, simply because you are the one who noticed it first. This week, you were not just experiencing pressure. You were experiencing alignment. Something in your life is moving toward a shift, and your spirit was one of the first to respond to it. Before it becomes visible, before it becomes clear, before it fully unfolds. And that early response feels like tension. It feels like uncertainty. It feels like being in between what was and what is about to be. That is why this week felt so unusual. Because you were not standing in something stable. You were standing in something transitional. And transitional spaces are never comfortable. They stretch you. They challenge your clarity. They make you question things that once felt certain. They create moments where you feel like you are losing control, when in reality, you are being repositioned. And repositioning always comes with pressure, because you cannot move into something new without releasing something old. You cannot step into a new level of awareness without feeling the discomfort of what no longer fits. You cannot carry what is coming next if you are still holding on to what belongs to the previous version of you. So the pressure you felt this week, it was not random. It was selective. It found you because you are responsive. It stayed with you because you are aware. And it intensified because something is trying to move through you, not around you. This is why you must not ignore what you felt. Because what you experienced is not something to escape from. It is something to understand. You were not chosen for pressure because you are weak. You were chosen because you can handle awareness. And awareness is what allows movement to happen. Awareness is what allows clarity to form. Awareness is what allows you to respond differently instead of reacting blindly. And right now, you are standing in that awareness. Even if it feels uncomfortable. Even if it feels unfamiliar. Even if it feels like too much at times. It is not too much for you. It is preparing you. Because what is coming next will require you to be exactly where you are right now, where, present, and able to see what others cannot. So do not question why this found you. Understand that it found you for a reason. Type "I accept the call" in the comments. Blessing code 1212 is now aligning your spirit. As this truth settles into your spirit, understand this. Every moment of awareness you receive is not just for you. It is a light meant to reach others who are still walking in confusion. When you sow into this message through Super Thanks, with a PayPal link in the description, you are not supporting a channel. You are releasing seeds into a harvest of souls waiting for clarity. The word declares, "Give, and it shall be given unto you." And this is not just scripture. It is a living flow of divine exchange moving through your obedience right now. I feel led to say this directly. I am stepping into this moment because I know my seed carries purpose. What you release today becomes a river that carries truth into someone else's darkness. Do not hesitate, because this moment is not casual. It is prophetic. As you give, heaven marks your obedience and multiplies it back into your life. Step forward now and activate what God has placed in your hands. There is a layer to what you have been experiencing that goes deeper than pressure, deeper than awareness, deeper even than the shift you have already begun to recognize. Because what you felt this week was not just a reaction to change. It was a response to resistance. And that resistance did not come from nowhere. Whenever something within you begins to rise, something equally strong begins to push back. Not because you are doing something wrong, but because movement always attracts opposition. Growth does not happen in isolation. It happens in tension. It happens in the space where what is expanding within you meets what is trying to hold you in place. And this week, the tension became visible through what you felt. There is a part of you that has been moving toward clarity, toward strength, toward a higher level of understanding. Even if you have not fully defined it, even if you have not spoken it out loud, it has been happening. You have been thinking differently. You have been seeing things differently. You have been questioning things you once accepted without hesitation. That is movement. But at the same time, something else has been trying to keep you where you were. That is resistance. And when these two forces meet, it does not create peace. It creates pressure. This is why you felt pulled in different directions. One part of you was ready to move forward, to let go, to step into something new. While another part of your environment, your habits, your familiar patterns, even certain connections, were pulling you back toward what you already know. This is not coincidence. This is the natural response of resistance when it senses that something is changing. Resistance does not always show up as something obvious. It does not always come as a clear obstacle that you can point to and say, "This is what is stopping me." Instead, it moves subtly. It creates doubt where there was once certainty. It creates hesitation where there was once confidence. It introduces small disruptions that slowly build into larger distractions. You may have noticed this in your thoughts. Moments where you questioned yourself more than usual. Moments where you second-guessed decisions that you normally would have made easily. Moments where you felt unsure, even when nothing concrete had changed. That is not weakness. That is resistance trying to interrupt your clarity. You may have also seen it in your environment. Plans not aligning. Timing feeling off. Interactions that felt slightly tense without any clear reason. Small delays that seemed insignificant on their own, but together created a sense that nothing was flowing the way it should. That is not bad luck. It is resistance trying to slow your movement. Because here is the truth that many people never fully realize. The moment you begin to shift internally, your external world does not immediately adjust. There is a period where the old and the new exist at the same time, where your mindset is evolving but your environment is still catching up, where your awareness is expanding but the structures around you have not yet changed. And that overlap is where the battle happens. You are no longer fully aligned with the old, but you have not fully stepped into the new. You are in between. And in that space, resistance becomes most active, because it knows this is the moment where you are most likely to turn back. This is the moment where doubt feels strongest, where confusion feels convincing, where it would be easier to return to what is familiar instead of continuing into what is unknown. And that is exactly what this week hath been testing. Not your strength, not your worth, but your direction. You were being placed in situations, in thoughts, in emotional states that were designed to see whether you would continue moving forward in awareness, or whether you would retreat back into what is comfortable. That is why everything felt intensified, because this was not just a passive experience. It was an active moment of tension between where you are going and what is trying to keep you where you were. But here is what you must understand now. Resistance only appears when something meaningful is at stake. If nothing was changing, there would be no pressure. If nothing was shifting, there would be no tension. If nothing was moving forward, there would be nothing to push against. The fact that you felt this so strongly is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something is happening. Something that matters enough to create this level of response. So do not misinterpret the pressure as a reason to stop. Recognize it as confirmation that you are already in motion. Even if you cannot see the full picture yet. Even if it still feels uncertain. Even if it still feels uncomfortable. Because the presence of resistance means one thing very clearly. You are not standing still anymore. Type "I keep moving forward" in the comments. Blessing code 333 is now strengthening your direction. There were moments this week that tried to get your attention, but you almost brushed them off. Not because you are unaware, not because you are disconnected, but because they were subtle. They did not come in a way that demanded your focus. They did not arrive loudly or dramatically. They appeared quietly, almost blending into your normal routine, almost easy to dismiss if you were not paying close attention. But your spirit noticed them. Even if your mind tried to move past them, something within you paused, even if only for a second. A small hesitation, a brief feeling that something was different. A quiet inner voice that said, "Look at this again." Those were not random moments. Those were signals. You may have experienced this as repeated thoughts that did not feel like your usual thinking pattern. Ideas or concerns that kept returning, even when you tried to shift your focus. You may have told yourself you were overthinking, that you needed to calm down, that it was nothing important. But those thoughts were not there without reason. They were trying to bring something into your awareness. You may have also noticed patterns in your environment that felt too consistent to ignore. The same type of situation appearing more than once. The same kind of interaction repeating with different people. The same emotional reaction surfacing in different contexts. At first, it seemed like coincidence. But as it continued, something inside you started to recognize that it was not random. That recognition was important. Because repetition is one of the clearest ways awareness tries to reach you. When something shows up once, it can be ignored. When it shows up again, it begins to stand out. When it continues to repeat, it becomes a message. And this week, there were messages present in your experience. But here is where it becomes even more important. You almost ignored them. You almost told yourself that it was nothing. You almost convinced yourself that you were reading too much into things. You almost chose comfort over clarity, because acknowledging what you were sensing would require you to look deeper than you initially wanted to. That hesitation is natural, because awareness comes with responsibility. The moment you recognize that something is not right, you can no longer pretend that everything is normal. The moment you see a pattern, you cannot unsee it. The moment you feel a shift, you cannot go back to the same level of perception you had before. And that can feel overwhelming. So the easiest response is to dismiss it, to move on, to tell yourself that it is not important enough to focus on. But your spirit does not operate that way. Your spirit does not bring something to your attention without purpose. Those small signs, those repeated thoughts, those subtle moments of discomfort, they were not interruptions. They were indicators. They were pointing you toward something that needed your awareness. You may not have fully understood them at the time. You may not have been able to connect all the pieces. But that does not make them insignificant. In fact, it makes them even more important. Because awareness often begins before understanding. You feel something before you can explain it. You notice something before you can define it. You sense something before you can fully interpret it. And that process can feel incomplete, which is why it is easy to dismiss. But incomplete does not mean incorrect. It means you are in the early stage of clarity. This is where many people disconnect. They wait for everything to make sense before they pay attention. They wait for a clear explanation before they trust what they feel. And by the time they recognize the full picture, they have already missed the early signals that could have guided them more clearly. But you did not completely ignore them. Even if you questioned them, even if you tried to move past them, something in you kept bringing them back. Something in you did not allow you to fully dismiss what you were experiencing. The persistence is important, because it means your awareness is active. It means you are not disconnected from what is happening around you. It means you are capable of recognizing shifts even before they fully reveal themselves. And that ability is what allows you to move with clarity instead of reacting after the fact. So do not overlook what you noticed this week. Do not minimize those moments just because they were subtle. They were not meant to overwhelm you. They were meant to prepare you. They were the first layer of understanding, the beginning of something that is still unfolding. And the more you allow yourself to acknowledge them, the more clearly the bigger picture will begin to form. Because what you almost ignored is actually part of what is guiding you forward. Type "I trust what I sense" in the comments. Lesson code 515 is now sharpening your awareness. There is something you have been trying to figure out all week, even if you have not put it into words. You kept asking yourself, why am I this tired? Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, even spiritually. It was a kind of exhaustion that rest did not fully fix. You could sit down, take a break, step away from your responsibilities, and yet the weight remained. That is what made it confusing. Because normal exhaustion has a clear cause. You work hard, you get tired. You deal with stress, you feel drained. And when you rest, your energy slowly returns. But what you experienced this week did not follow that pattern. It lingered. And staying. It resurfaced even after moments that should have restored you. And that is where you started questioning yourself. You wondered if something was wrong with you. You wondered if you were becoming too sensitive, too overwhelmed, too affected by things that you should be able to handle. You may have even compared yourself to others, thinking they seem fine, so why does this feel so heavy for you? But this is where clarity becomes necessary. Because not all exhaustion is the same. There is a difference between emotional fatigue and spiritual pressure, and this week, the line between the two became blurred for you. Emotional exhaustion comes from what you experience. It builds up through interactions, responsibilities, challenges, and situations that require your attention and energy. It is connected to what you are actively doing and responding to. But spiritual pressure operates differently. It does not always come from what you are doing. It comes from what is happening around you, beneath the surface, in ways that are not always visible. It can affect you even when you are not actively engaged in anything stressful. It can settle in quietly, without a clear source, and yet feel just as real, if not more intense. This is why you felt tired even when you could not explain why. Because what you were carrying was not only emotional, it was environmental. It was atmospheric. It was connected to the shift that has been happening around you, not just within your daily experiences. And your spirit was working to process that shift, even while your mind was trying to keep up. That kind of processing requires energy. It requires attention. It requires your awareness to stay active, even when you are not consciously thinking about it. And over time, that creates a form of exhaustion that does not feel familiar, because it is not tied to something obvious. This is also why your emotions felt amplified. Small things may have affected you more than usual. Situations that you would normally handle with ease may have felt heavier, more complicated, more draining. Not because you suddenly lost your ability to manage them, but because your capacity was already being used to process something deeper. So when additional pressure appeared, even in small forms, it felt like too much. That is not weakness. That is overload. And overload happens when your internal system is managing more than one layer of experience at the same time. You were not just dealing with your normal responsibilities this week. You were also adjusting to a shift in your environment. You were also responding to subtle signals and patterns. You were also navigating the tension between movement and resistance. All of that requires energy. All of that contributes to the exhaustion you felt. But here is the part that changes everything. Spiritual pressure is not meant to drain you permanently. It is meant to get your attention. It is meant to highlight something that requires awareness, something that is shifting, something that is preparing you for the next stage of movement, And once that awareness begins to form, the pressure starts to make more sense, because it is no longer just a feeling. It becomes information. And when you understand what you are experiencing, it no longer has the same level of control over you. You are able to respond instead of just react. You are able to manage your energy instead of feeling consumed by it. This is why recognizing the difference between emotional exhaustion and spiritual pressure is so important. Because if you misinterpret it, you will try to solve it the wrong way. You will think you just need more rest, when what you actually need is more clarity. You will think you are overwhelmed, when what is really happening is that you are becoming aware of something deeper. You will think you are losing your balance, when in reality, you are adjusting to a new level of perception. And once you understand that, everything begins to shift. The exhaustion no longer feels like something is wrong with you. It becomes a signal that something is changing around you. And when you see it that way, you stop fighting it and you start learning from it. Type "I understand my energy" in the comments. Blessing code 626 is now restoring your strength. There's a part of this experience that you have not fully considered yet, and it is the part that brings balance to everything you have been feeling. Because while you have been focused on the pressure, the exhaustion, the confusion, there has also been something else present this entire time. Protection. You may not have seen it clearly. You may not have recognized it in the moment. But if you look closely at this past week, you will begin to notice something important. Despite the pressure, despite the resistance, despite the emotional weight, you were not overwhelmed beyond recovery. You bent, but you did not break. You felt the intensity, but you were still able to move through your days. You questioned things, but you did not completely lose your clarity. That is not something to overlook. Because when pressure increases without protection, it leads to collapse. But that is not what happened to you. What happened instead was containment. The pressure reached a certain level, but it did not go beyond what you could handle. And that is where the presence of protection becomes clear. In moments like this, there is an unseen balance taking place. While one force is creating pressure, another force is maintaining stability. While something is pushing against you, something else is holding you steady. And even though your focus has been on what felt heavy, there has also been something quietly working to keep you grounded. That is the role of divine protection in a season like this. It does not always remove the pressure. It does not always eliminate the tension. But it ensures that what you are experiencing does not overwhelm you completely. It keeps the experience within a range that you can process, that you can learn from, that you can move through. This is why, even at your lowest point this week, there was still a part of you that remained aware. There was still a part of you that observed what you were feeling instead of being completely consumed by. There was still a part of you that questioned what was happening instead of accepting it as permanent. That awareness is not accidental. It is maintained. Because protection does not always look like removing challenges. Sometimes it looks like strengthening your ability to move through them without losing yourself in the process. And this is where the presence of Archangel Michael becomes significant in this season. His role is not to eliminate every difficulty. It is to stand within the tension and ensure that truth is not lost. To ensure that clarity remains accessible. To ensure that even when pressure builds, you are not left without guidance. This kind of protection works quietly. It shows up in moments where something could have escalated, but did not. It shows up in situations where you could have reacted impulsively, but instead paused. It shows up in times where confusion could have taken over completely, but instead, you felt a subtle sense of restraint. Those are not random pauses. Those are interventions. You may not have recognized them as such, but they were there. The conversation you chose not to engage in. The reaction you held back. The decision you delayed instead of rushing into. The moment you stepped away instead of pushing further. Each of these moments reflects a form of guidance that was active, even while the pressure was present. Because protection in this season is not about stopping everything from happening. It is about guiding how you move through what is happening. And this guidance becomes even more important when you are in a transitional space, when things are shifting, when your awareness is increasing, when your environment is adjusting. Because during these moments, the risk is not just the pressure itself. The risk is how you respond to it. Without guidance, pressure can lead to impulsive decisions, unnecessary conflict, or actions that pull you away from the direction you are meant to move in. But with protection in place, even when you feel the intensity, there is a boundary that prevents you from going too far off course. And that boundary has been active in your life this week. Even if you did not fully see it. Even if you were more focused on what felt heavy than what was holding you steady. So as you reflect on what you have experienced, do not only focus on the pressure, also recognize the restraint. Do not only focus on the confusion, also recognize the moments of clarity that still appeared within it. Do not only focus on what felt difficult, also acknowledge what did not fall apart, because that is where you will begin to see the full picture. You were not alone in what you experienced this week. There was something working with you, guiding you, maintaining balance even when things felt uncertain, and understanding that changes how you move forward. Because now, you are not just aware of the pressure, you are also aware that you are being supported through it. Type I am protected and guided in the comments. Lesson code 444 is now strengthening your path. There is a reason this did not happen gradually. There is a reason it did not build slowly over time, giving you space to adjust little by little. Instead, it seemed to arrive all at once, as if everything intensified within a short period, as if the weight increased without warning, as if the pressure reached a level that demanded your attention immediately. And that timing is not random. What you experienced this week was not just pressure. It was a peak. There are moments in any cycle of change where everything begins to converge. The internal shifts, the external reactions, the awareness, the resistance, all of it reaches a point where it can no longer remain subtle. It has to become noticeable. It has to be felt clearly enough that you cannot ignore it anymore. That is what this week represented for you. A point of convergence. Everything that had been quietly building beneath the surface reached a level where it had to show itself. The tension became stronger. The emotions became more noticeable. The patterns became harder to dismiss. And the pressure became undeniable. Because you reached a moment where awareness was no longer optional. Up until this point, you could have continued moving without fully acknowledging what was changing. You could have continued operating on routine, on familiarity, on what you were used to. But something in your life has reached a stage where that is no longer possible. And that is why the intensity increased. Because intensity forces attention. It removes the option to ignore. It removes the ability to stay passive. It creates a moment where you are required to notice, to feel, to recognize what is happening instead of moving past it. This is why everything seemed to happen at once. The emotional weight, the mental pressure, the sense that something was off, even if you could not fully explain it. All of it was amplified, not to overwhelm you, but to wake you up to the shift that has already begun. Because there are times when subtle signals are not enough. There are times when awareness needs to be undeniable. And this week was one of those times. You may have wondered why it felt heavier now than before. Why situations that you have handled many times suddenly felt more intense. Why your reactions felt stronger. Why your thoughts felt more persistent. It is because you are no longer at the beginning of this shift. You are in the middle of it. And the middle is always the most intense part, because it is the point where you are far enough from the old that it no longer fits, but not yet fully established in the new. It is the space where everything feels uncertain, where clarity is still forming, where direction is still being defined. And in that space, pressure increases, not as a sign that something is going wrong, but as a sign that something is reaching completion. This is the part many people misunderstand. They experience the peak of pressure and assume it means they are failing, that something is collapsing, that they need to step back or return to what is familiar. But the peak is not the end. It is the turning point. It is the moment where everything that has been building begins to shift into something new. And that shift requires your full awareness. It requires you to recognize that what you are feeling is not random discomfort, but a signal that something is about to change. It requires you to stay present instead of retreating. It requires you to move through the intensity instead of trying to escape it. Because this level of pressure does not last forever. It rises, it peaks, and then it transforms. But the transformation only happens if you remain aware through the peak. If you allow yourself to understand what is happening instead of reacting to it. If you recognize that the intensity you felt this week is connected to something that is about to shift in your life. So do not misinterpret what happened. Do not see this week as a setback. Do not see this pressure as something that is working against you. See it for what it is. A signal. A moment where everything that has been building has reached the point where it can no longer remain hidden. And now that it has reached that point, the next phase can begin. Type "I see the turning point" in the comments. Blessing code 808 is now activating breakthrough energy around you. As you recognize this turning point, understand that moments like this are not only meant to transform you, they are meant to reach others who are still standing in confusion, waiting for clarity to find them. When you release your support through Super Thanks or through the PayPal link in the description, you are not giving to a platform. You are sowing into a movement that carries light into places where darkness has lingered too long. The word speaks, "Those who sow in faith shall reap in abundance," and this is not distant truth. It is a living flow that responds to your obedience right now. I feel this strongly. I step into this moment because I know my seed is part of someone else's breakthrough. What you give becomes a stream that carries this message further than you can see. Do not delay this action, because this is not just generosity, it is alignment. Release what is in your hand, and watch heaven release what has been waiting for you. There is something else that was working quietly beneath everything you experienced this week, something that did not come with pressure alone, but came with a very specific intention. To distract you. To pull your focus away from what is actually happening and redirect it toward confusion, doubt, and unnecessary mental noise. Because when pressure increases, distraction often follows. Not randomly, but strategically. It begins to show up in your thoughts, in your reactions, in the way you interpret situations. And if you are not aware of it, it can feel like your own mind is working against you. You may have noticed how your thoughts became louder this week. Not clearer, not more focused, but louder. More repetitive. More questioning. More uncertain. Simple decisions may have felt harder to make. Clear situations may have started to feel complicated. You may have found yourself going back and forth on things that you would normally handle with confidence. That is not coincidence. That is distraction attaching itself to pressure. Because when your environment shifts and your awareness increases, your clarity becomes more important than ever. And the easiest way to interrupt that clarity is not through obvious obstacles, but through internal noise. Doubt, overthinking, second-guessing. These are not just random mental habits. In moments like this, they become tools that can pull you away from your center. They can make you question what you already sensed. They can make you hesitate when you should be moving forward. They can make you focus on what is uncertain instead of what is becoming clear. This is why you may have felt like you were losing direction, even though nothing concrete had changed. Because your focus was being pulled in too many directions at once. Part of you was becoming aware. Part of you was trying to understand the shift. And another part was being flooded with doubt, making you question everything at the same time. That creates confusion. Not because you lack clarity, but because your attention is divided. And when your attention is divided, even the clearest path can feel uncertain. You may have also noticed distractions in your environment. Things that suddenly demanded your attention at the wrong time. Interruptions that broke your focus just when you were starting to think clearly. Situations that pulled you into conversations or emotions that had nothing to do with what you were actually processing. These are not always dramatic. Sometimes they are small, almost insignificant on their own. But when they happen repeatedly, they begin to take up space in your mind. They begin to drain your focus. They begin to shift your attention away from what matters. And that is the trap. Because distraction does not need to stop you completely. It only needs to delay you. It only needs to keep you occupied long enough that you do not fully process what is happening. It only needs to keep your mind busy so that your awareness cannot fully settle into clarity. This is why this week may have felt scattered. Not just heavy, but scattered. Your thoughts moving in different directions. Your emotions shifting quickly. Your focus being pulled away just when you were starting to understand something. That is not a lack of control. That is the result of distraction working alongside pressure. But here is where everything begins to change. The moment you recognize the distraction, it loses its power. Because distraction relies on unconscious engagement. It works when you are not aware that your attention is being pulled. It works when you assume that every thought deserves your focus, that every emotion requires your reaction, that every situation needs your immediate involvement. But once you step back and observe what is happening, you begin to see the pattern. You begin to notice which thoughts are repetitive without purpose. You begin to recognize which situations are pulling you away from what actually matters. You begin to separate what is important from what is simply noise. And that separation is where clarity begins to return. Because your mind is not meant to carry everything at once. Your focus is not meant to be divided endlessly. Your awareness is meant to be directed, not scattered. So as you move forward from this week, do not just focus on the pressure you felt. Also pay attention to where your attention was being pulled. Notice what distracted you. Notice what caused you to doubt yourself. Notice what made things feel more complicated than they actually were. Because once you see those patterns clearly, they can no longer control your direction. And when your direction is no longer controlled by distraction, your clarity becomes stronger than your doubt. I control my focus in the comments. Lesson code 919 is now sharpening your clarity. There is a deeper purpose behind everything you have felt this week, and it goes beyond the pressure, beyond the confusion, beyond even the awareness that has been rising within you. Because this was not only about what was happening around you, it was about what is being changed within you. All of this intensity, all of this pressure, all of these moments that felt uncertain or overwhelming, they were not designed to break you. They were designed to move something inside you that has been ready to shift for a long time. And that shift is not external first. is internal. You may have thought this week was about your environment, about the situations you faced, about the people or circumstances that felt different. But the truth is, those were only reflections. What is really happening is that something within you is no longer willing to stay the same. Something in your thinking has been challenged. Something in your perception has been stretched. Something in your identity is being refined. You are not responding to things the way you used to. You are not seeing things the way you once did. You are not as comfortable with certain patterns, certain conversations, certain environments that once felt normal to you, and that can feel unsettling. Because growth does not always feel like progress in the moment. Sometimes it feels like discomfort. Sometimes it feels like losing your sense of familiarity. Sometimes it feels like you are outgrowing parts of your life without fully knowing what is replacing them yet. That is exactly where you are. This week exposed the gap between who you were and who you are becoming. And that gap creates pressure. Because the old version of you cannot fully operate in the same way anymore, but the new version of you is still forming. So you find yourself in between, not fully aligned with the past, not fully settled into the future. And in that space, everything feels intensified. The way you think, the way you feel, the way you respond, even the way you interpret situations. This is not confusion. This is recalibration. Your internal system is adjusting to a new level of awareness, a new level of clarity, a new level of understanding. And that adjustment requires you to release what no longer aligns with where you are going. That release is not always obvious. It does not always come as a clear decision or a defined action. Sometimes it happens through discomfort, through the realization that something no longer fits, through the feeling that certain things drain you instead of support you. You may have noticed this in your interactions. Conversations that once felt easy may have felt heavier. Situations that you used to tolerate may have felt more difficult to stay in. Even your own thoughts may have started to shift, questioning things you once accepted without resistance. That is not instability. That is transformation. Because when something inside you begins to shift, it changes your relationship with everything around you. What once aligned may no longer feel right. What once made sense may now feel incomplete. What once felt comfortable may now feel limiting. And that can create a sense of loss. Not because something is being taken from you, but because something is being replaced. But replacement takes time. And during that time, you are left in a space where things feel uncertain. That uncertainty is not a sign that you are lost. It is a sign that you are evolving. You are being moved into a version of yourself that requires more awareness, more clarity, more intention. And that version cannot operate in the same way you did before. So the pressure you felt this week, it was not just external resistance. It was internal adjustment. It was the process of aligning who you are with where you are being led. And alignment is not always comfortable. It requires honesty. It requires awareness. It requires you to see things clearly, even when it challenges what you were used to. But once that alignment begins to settle, everything changes. Your clarity becomes stronger. Your decisions become more intentional. Your energy becomes more focused. And the pressure that once felt overwhelming begins to make sense. Because it was never meant to stay. It was meant to shift you. Type "I accept my transformation" in the comments. Blessing code 1010 is now activating your alignment. There comes a point in every shift where awareness is no longer enough. You have felt the pressure. You have recognized the patterns. You have begun to understand the difference between what is happening around you and what is happening within you. But now, you are standing at a moment that requires something more than observation. It requires a decision, not a loud, dramatic decision, not something that needs to be announced or explained to anyone else, but a clear, internal commitment about how you are going to move forward from here. Because this is where everything begins to take direction. Up until this point, things have been happening to you. The pressure arrived. A shift unfolded. The awareness started forming. But from this moment on, it is no longer just about what is happening to you. It is about how you choose to respond to it. And that choice matters more than anything else. You can feel everything you felt this week and still return to the same patterns. You can recognize the shift and still ignore it. You can understand the pressure and still allow it to control your direction. Or you can choose differently. You can decide that what you experienced was not random, and that it deserves your full attention. You can decide that the awareness you have gained is something you will act on, not something you will set aside once things feel easier again. Because that is the real test of a moment like this. Not whether you felt it, but whether you respond to it. There is a version of you that is being invited forward right now. A version that is more aware, more intentional, more aligned with what is actually true instead of what is simply familiar. And stepping into that version requires you to let go of something. Not necessarily something physical, but something internal. Old ways of thinking, old habits of reacting, old patterns of ignoring what you feel in favor of what is comfortable. These are the things that must be released for the shift to complete. And that is where the decision becomes real. Because letting go is not always easy. Even when you know something no longer fits, there is a part of you that wants to hold on to it simply because it is familiar. There is a part of you that wants to stay in what you understand, even if it is no longer aligned with who you are becoming. That is the tension you are standing in right now. Between what you know and what you are being shown. Between what is comfortable and what is correct. Between staying the same and moving forward. And you cannot stay in between forever. At some point, you have to choose a direction. Not perfectly, not all at once, but intentionally. You have to decide that you will no longer ignore what you sense. That you will no longer dismiss the patterns that become clear to you. That you will no longer allow distraction or doubt to pull you away from your awareness. Because once you make that decision, something shifts immediately. The pressure that once felt overwhelming begins to organize itself into clarity. The confusion that once felt constant begins to separate into understanding. The uncertainty that once felt heavy begins to reveal direction. Not because everything changes instantly, but because your position changes. You are no longer reacting. You are responding. And there is a difference. Reaction comes from confusion, from pressure, from emotion that has not been fully understood. Response comes from awareness, from clarity, from a place where you are choosing your direction instead of being pulled by circumstances. This is the moment where you step into that response. You do not need to have every answer. You do not need to see the entire path. You only need to recognize that what you experienced this week was meaningful and that you are choosing to move forward with that understanding instead of leaving it behind. That is the decision. Simple, but powerful. Quiet, but defining. And once it is made, everything that follows begins to align with it. Type "I choose clarity" in the comments. Blessing code 222 is now aligning your decisions. Now you are standing at the edge of something that did not feel possible just a few days ago. Because everything you have experienced this week, the pressure, the confusion, the emotional weight, the internal shift, it was not leading you toward collapse. It was leading you toward breakthrough. But not the kind of breakthrough that arrives suddenly without warning. Not the kind that appears out of nowhere without preparation. No, this is the kind that forms under pressure, the kind that builds quietly, the kind that only becomes visible after something inside you has already changed. And that is exactly what has happened. Something in you is no longer the same. You may not have fully defined it yet. You may not have put it into words, but you can feel it. There is a difference in how you are processing things, a difference in how you are seeing things, a difference in how you are responding, even if it is subtle. That difference is the beginning of your breakthrough, because breakthrough does not start outside of you. It starts within you. It begins the moment your awareness becomes stronger than your confusion. It begins the moment your clarity becomes more important than your comfort. It begins the moment you stop trying to return to who you were and start accepting who you are becoming. And that moment has already started for you. This is why the pressure had to come first. Because without the pressure, there would be no shift. Without the shift, there would be no awareness. Without the awareness, there would be no breakthrough. Everything you felt was part of a sequence, a process that had to unfold in a specific order. And now, you have reached the point where that process begins to reveal its purpose. You are no longer just reacting to what you feel. You are beginning to understand it. You are no longer just experiencing confusion. You are starting to see patterns. You are no longer just carrying pressure. You are recognizing what it is connected to. And that recognition changes everything. Because once you see clearly, you cannot go back to not seeing. Once you understand, you cannot return to the same level of awareness you had before. Once you shift internally, your external reality begins to follow. That is how breakthrough works. It does not happen all at once. It unfolds. It begins quietly. It strengthens over time. And then, at a certain point, it becomes undeniable. You may not see the full result yet. You may not have all the answers yet. But you are no longer where you were. And that matters more than anything else. Because progress is not always measured by what has changed around you. Sometimes, it is measured by what has changed within you. The way you think, the way you respond, the way you choose clarity instead of confusion, the way you recognize patterns instead of ignoring them. These are the signs that something real is happening. And as you continue to move forward with this awareness, you will begin to notice something else. The pressure will start to ease. Not because everything is suddenly perfect, but because you are no longer resisting the shift. You are moving with it. And when you move with it, the same intensity that once felt overwhelming begins to transform into direction. The same awareness that once felt heavy begins to feel empowering. The same uncertainty that once felt confusing begins to feel like possibility. This is the transition. From pressure to clarity. From confusion to understanding. From resistance to alignment. And you are already in it. So do not look back at this week as something negative. Do not label it as a setback. Do not try to forget it or move past it as quickly as possible. Recognize it for what it is. A turning point. A moment where something within you changed in a way that will continue to unfold in the days ahead. And the more you stay aware, the more you stay aligned. The more you trust what you have begun to understand, the clearer your path will become. Because breakthrough is not something you chase. It is something you step into. And you have already taken the first step. Type "I step into my breakthrough" in the comments. Blessing code 121 is now activating your next level. As you step into this breakthrough, understand that your alignment is not just transforming your life. It is becoming a light for others who are still trapped in pressure without understanding. Every seed you release into this mission becomes a spark that ignites clarity in someone else's darkness. When you give through Super Thanks, or the PayPal link in the description, you are not supporting content. You are opening channels for God's truth to reach souls who are waiting for this exact moment of awakening. The word declares, "Give, and it shall be given unto you. Pressed down, shaken together, and running over." And this is a living promise speaking directly into your season right now. I step into this moment knowing my giving carries divine purpose and eternal impact. What you release today becomes a river flowing into lives you may never see, but heaven records every act. Do not delay this calling. Move now, respond now, and let your obedience unlock the next level of blessing over your life.